But anyway, we're going to talk first about the deadline. Today was supposedly supposed to be the deadline for the EU and many other places around the world to reach their surrender deals with Donald Trump or face 50% tariffs. But that deadline has come and gone. Now it seems to be August 1st. Nobody really knows. So we're going to talk about that a bit. And if you guys watching have any questions for us, you can type them in there at the bottom and I'll take them at the end. So yeah, let's talk about this lapsed deadline. I mean, this is really entering the area of farce at this point because the Commission is rushing to try to make this deal with the US, and they say negotiations are very fruitful and they're continuing. And meanwhile, the US side is just complete chaos. And you have Trump saying earlier this week that the new deadline was going to be August 1st, but then his Treasury Secretary walking that back, saying, no, it's still July 9th as planned. We can see clearly it is now July 9th. There's no tariffs. So unless he suddenly changes his mind by the end of the day, the new deadline is August 1st. But the big question is whether the Commission should reach some kind of quick and dirty deal, as I believe German Chancellor Merz put it at the European Council Summit in June, just a couple of weeks ago, or whether they should hold firm because it really looks like no matter what, Trump always chickens out that he is not going to slap on those threatened 50% tariffs. I saw reporting this morning that says the thinks they're getting close to the kind of skeleton of a deal that basically they would emulate the UK's deal with the US, which was a whole lot of nothing really, but it allowed the Trump regime to save face that they had intimidated the UK into reaching this deal. Although now it seems like parts of that deal aren't even being honored with steel. What's your take on this? Because I'm actually torn about whether the EU should, if it doesn't cost the EU much to reach some kind of face-saving deal like the UK did with the US, then maybe what's the harm? But at the same time, I think, well, why do they need to do that if we're pretty sure that Trump will never actually trigger these 50% tariffs?
I mean, this is one of those really, really weird policy areas where it's so dependent on whether or not you can actually trust the other guy to do what they need to do, right? So, for example, talking about the UK deal, technically, if I'm not wrong, nothing has actually been signed yet. There's no official deal. So, Trump made the big deal and brouhaha about having 90 trade deals within 90 days. I think we're on day 91 right now. There's not been a single trade deal that has actually been implemented properly in any way, shape, or form, right? So already you have a question of can you trust the Trump administration, which what we're seeing at the moment is obviously you can't, right? I mean, for example, you had Pete Hegseth who went rogue and cut off all support for Ukraine without speaking to anybody, and no one really had any idea about that. And now we're hearing lots of back and forth, and every direction there's something about, oh, we'll extend the deadline, or no, we're going to offer this trade deal, or we're going to do whatever. I mean, what we do know is that the Trump administration has apparently made an offer of 10% blanket tariffs on everything, except for the 25% on cars and the 50% on steel and aluminium.
Which is what the UK accepted, to basically the same deal as the UK.
And to be honest, in my point of view, so you have two options, as you said. One, you just suck it up and you just go for it and find a solution down the line. On the other hand, the EU does have some extremely powerful weaponry that it can use during a trade war. The problem is that do you want to pay the cost of going to war with the US with a man-child in the Oval Office, surrounded by people who are doing whatever pops up in their head when they want? And I don't think that von der Leyen is entirely keen, nor is her team, nor is the Commission, nor is the member states.
Right.
No one is keen in getting into a fight when you have all of these elections coming and going as time goes on. I mean, in France, we have the municipals. You have the far right who is taking advantage of every single small mistake or problem all over the place. And if they go into a trade war and it goes on for too long, then we have an issue as a European Union. But
well, go ahead. Yeah.
Just one small thing. There is something to be said about the fact that when China stood up to America and Trump's tariffs, Trump backed down pretty quickly when he kept doing that escalation race, right? And if I'm not wrong, the US has more trade exposure to the EU. So technically, there is a chance that any escalation would ramp up far quicker than it would with the China situation, which I think took 2 months to hit its peak and then collapse.
Mm.
But again, the damage is also higher for the European Union at this stage because we don't have the centralized economies and the market levers that China has, for example. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. I lean towards make a deal and try to find a way out somehow. But then we're making another deal with another authoritarian power. That's not really our friend.
Yeah, I think the difference between the China situation and the EU situation is the markets clearly have built in some kind of expectation of trade friction between the US and China. They're not so spooked by that, but they're clearly very spooked by EU-US trade being disrupted because it is one of, if not the largest trade relationship in the world, I believe. And so that makes the markets completely panic. And so even having 50% tariffs on the books for a week would result in such a market meltdown, and particularly a
Yeah.
bond market meltdown, that it's hard to imagine Trump doesn't chicken out on that. And that's where I wonder, I mean, so President Macron's change of vibe on this was very evident at the European Council summit 2 weeks ago, where he came in starting to suggest, okay, maybe we could accept 10% tariffs like the UK did. Basically saying he's not going to take this hardline position that the EU should refuse to accept the 10%. But the thing is, I think a lot of people don't realize that there is a cost in accepting what feels like a nothing trade deal. There was a cost to the UK because the UK had to accept the 10%, which is basically illegal under the WTO. I mean, these tariffs are not retaliatory tariffs. They are made up. They are illegal under international trade law. But the UK, in order to get this quote unquote deal, which, as you said, isn't much of a deal, with Trump, has had to accept that they will not take this to the WTO. And so it's really a surrender to something. I mean, the tariffs were nothing before. Then Trump threatens 50%. And so the EU accepts 10%. And then it's clear who won there. Trump won because the EU is accepting tariffs that weren't there before. And because Trump made this maximalist threat, the EU accepts a lesser amount, which I believe they already initiated the WTO objection to that. The WTO is totally broken anyway. I don't see that going anywhere. But I'm sure part of the deal is that they have to withdraw that objection. And accepting that 10%, I mean, 10% is a lot. And it's especially problematic when you're accepting a 10% that is completely unjustified by international law and WTO rules.
Yeah, and I mean, it's part of this big issue where, as you said, the WTO is broken. And these international institutions only really function when all of the actors who form a part of it are actually going to support it and play by the rules, which we've seen Trump doesn't want to. I mean, he left the WTO or something in his first mandate. I think Biden rejoined, and I think they're in the process of leaving again under Trump because they don't like the rules. But I mean, really, the biggest issue that I can see right now, and I understand the French position, not only because I am French and this is my zone, but because of the fact that France can't really be picking fights on multiple trade deals at the same time. France is currently leading the charge on the Mercosur rollback and the renegotiations within the union, which means that there's not enough political capital to be burning on trying to shut down a US trade deal or start a trade war with Trump, right? But on top of this, is this sense that you can't really win with Trump, right? Because he's this quite unstable, not particularly coherent or reliable actor who, sure, you can get him to back down short term, right? You can get him to back down, to not pick the fight, to go lick his wounds somewhere. But the problem is he then developed these really obsessive, unstable obsessions with punishing anybody who does anything wrong to him, right? I mean, what is it?
Yeah.
His obsession with Obama has been going on now for over 10 years because Obama didn't invite him to an inauguration ball or something and didn't make him the governor of, Wisconsin or whatever the hell it was, right? And this led to... Go, go,
it's
go,
well,
go.
just it's exactly that. That I think that on the EU side, they know, and President Macron knows that Trump would probably back down in the short term. But I think, yeah, you're right. The feeling is they have to give him some face-saving way out in order to not, well, they think in order to get him to back off and not have Europe be the target of his wrath. But the reality is you just don't know with him, right?
Yeah.
And I just don't see why this face-saving way out has to come with accepting the 10%. Because again, that is just a major, major concession. And
Mm.
for what? And I think if they're looking at what happened with the UK, like you said, nothing has been signed. It looks like the UK is still going to have these steel tariffs slapped on them, which I think on the UK side, their expectation was they wouldn't. So what
Yeah.
exactly did the UK get? Um, they just got 10% more tariffs than they had before. It's weird because I keep seeing in the UK, the pundit class on media keeps heralding this as a big win for the UK.
Yeah.
That,
But I mean, like, a lot of those guys are the guys who thought Brexit was a great idea too, remember? I
yeah,
mean,
right.
we've reached a stage in international politics where it's become a Monty Python sketch where all the wrong people, all the worst people who don't actually understand what's going on are saying,
Mm,
yeah, Donald Trump is our friend, we signed a trade deal, look at this paper, etc., when nothing's actually been signed or implemented yet, right? It's like nothing really has changed except for the tariffs have gone up by everybody. But I think there is one potential explanation for why this trade deal is going the way it's going. And I think it's because von der Leyen's commission or geopolitical commission, which is a bit of a comical joke right now in Brussels, isn't really working out the way anybody expected it to. I mean,
mm,
what is it? We're barely a year, well, we're nearing the end of the first year of von der Leyen 2, of the second geopolitical commission that was going to transform Europe into a power. Cough, cough, is the council doing all the work at this stage.
yeah.
And basically what's happened is now that von der Leyen is seeing that her Green Deal is basically collapsing because the fact that they got a bit too zealous on the Timmermans and everything. Now that they're having to spend all of this time reviewing everything they did in the first mandate, now that you've got the European Defense Collaboration Initiative, the troops on the ground in Ukraine and everything being led by member states, most notably France by Macron, and non-EU member states like the UK and even Canada at this stage, there's a loss of confidence in the Commission.
Yeah,
There's
completely.
within and externally. And
Yep.
it's not a great place to be, right?
Yeah, you can see the Commission has completely lost initiative here. And by extension, the EU has lost initiative. So let's talk
Yeah.
a little bit about our illustrious president. I saw this morning in Strasbourg, she was making a speech to the European Parliament, and it was tweeted on her social media that von der Leyen about to make announcements on defense union and geoeconomics. And I thought, ooh, what's this going to be? And I watched it. And she basically what she was doing was just summing up the discussion that was a line item at the European Council Summit 2 weeks ago, where they talked about geoeconomics, which is code
Yeah.
for trying to make the euro the world's reserve currency instead of the dollar, because the dollar is completely crashing at the moment.
Yeah.
But they're very coy about how they're talking about this at the moment. Basically, I watched it. She didn't say anything. I mean, she
Yeah.
basically was just summing up what they discussed at the council about the geoeconomic situation. And in terms of defense, she's going to come back with this report for the next European Council in October. But it's really not. I mean, the initiative, as she said again this morning, the initiative it's on NATO. NATO's doing it. NATO is
Yeah.
coordinating this. And okay, the Commission is going to come in with some advice to make sure we don't have duplication. But she is completely. I mean, to put it bluntly, she is not the woman that we need right now at this moment. And she is starting to feel very much like a lame duck. But, that's why she
Yeah.
was reappointed for her second term. The national leaders like someone that they can boss around. They like to have someone as the EU president who's not going to challenge their leadership and challenge them in any way. And this is what we've ended up with. But it's really bad when you have a Europe kind of besieged on all sides here, that we don't have EU leadership. And in the council, as you
Yeah.
say, think that the initiative keeps going over to the council, but who in the council? It's not even clear who is kind of
Yeah.
leading the council at the moment.
I mean, it's one of these weird things where I think, to be fair, I have some ideas of why this commission feels weird than the last one. So I think in von der Leyen, there was lots of initiative in the council. Von der Leyen wasn't afraid of picking fights with everybody across the board, right? But then von der Leyen started picking some very odd fights with the member states. So apparently, she went over Macron's head, apparently, when it came to the Mercosur deal and tried to force it through as quickly as possible so that France couldn't object. That pissed off the French. Then you had the whole fight over, I can't even remember what anymore. It was one of the trade deals, not Mercosur, but another one, where she then decided that she was going to play games with attending the reopening of Notre Dame and the celebration that it was being reopened, which led to more stress with France. Then she tried to play a few too many games in the parliament and the commission, which led to, as we're going to talk about in a not too long, the Grand Coalition in the parliament basically like folding in on itself, and now everybody's pointing guns at each other. Basically, I think von der Leyen got a bit too cocky. She got way too cocky, and there's this progressive reminder of why people like myself think that having, for example, a council president and a commission president doesn't function, right? Because we have too many leaders that are basically, when they lose the dynamic, when they lose the initiative, it's so abhorrently obvious. And on top of that, I mean, we saw it again this morning, this famous statement, who do you call in the European Union if you want to speak to the EU, right? And this was brought up this morning by, I think, was it one of the Trump press secretaries or something? Where there was a complaint about the fact that part of the trade deal issue and even the defense issues is that they don't know who to speak to at the European level, right? Do they speak to Macron? Do they speak to Merz? Do they speak to Meloni? Do they speak to, I don't know, whoever the head of DG Defense or whatever the hell they're calling it now at this stage, right?
I mean, the thing is, on trade, there is a very clear answer to that, and it's President von der Leyen. But the Trump administration doesn't seem to know that, or they're pretending they don't know that,
They don't
because
like
they're not
that.
even taking her calls. She
No.
can't even get a phone call in to Donald Trump. Notoriously, he just like bypasses her. He won't speak to her. And Nick, he's kept trying to talk to countries individually about trade and getting slapped down, even by Giorgia Meloni, to her credit, who said it there in the White House directly to him. I cannot negotiate on trade. That was, I was impressed that she was so clear on that. But there is someone to talk to on this, and I think the White House is being disingenuous when they say, "Oh, we don't know who to talk to."
Of course.
The thing is, it's clearly von der Leyen, she's being ignored by the White House, and she has not been successful in making herself heard. And I think that's partly because the European leaders who have Trump's ear or who have gone to visit him have not vouched for her. They haven't said, "Hey, you need to talk to von der Leyen." I mean, Meloni kind of said that but she didn't say her specifically, right?
Yeah, of course.
So I think, I mean, and it brings us to this confidence vote that's happening tomorrow. So it's a tricky one, this, because I was asked to do an interview with the BBC about this on Monday during the debate. And I didn't want to start off by saying, this is a non-story, this will never pass. But you kind of have to get that out of the way, because no confidence motion in the European Parliament requires a 2/3 majority. There's no way they're getting to that number. It's technically never happened in EU history, although the threat of doing it made the Center Commission resign in 1999. But the confusing thing is that it was the far right that brought, so for anyone not following this issue, a far right Romanian MEP in Giorgia Meloni's ECR group started collecting signatures because of the Pfizer gate stuff. Was kind of non-scandal, which I think is really stupid. That von der Leyen didn't release her private text messages with the CEO of Pfizer. I know Politico and all them are very excited about this. I don't get it.
I'm so surprised Politico's excited by this.
I mean, it's so. I mean, to be fair, it was the New York Times that brought the lawsuit about not disclosing it, and it is annoying that it's not disclosed and that they're still not obeying the court ruling. But I don't see this as among all the things that annoy me about von der Leyen, this is not up there. But anyway, that's the reason why this no confidence motion was brought. And so on the debate about the no confidence motion on Monday night in the European Parliament in Strasbourg, von der Leyen came out saying basically this is a Russian plot essentially, that this is the far right trying to destabilize democracy. And she called, it was a little annoying that she called the Pfizer Gate thing a conspiracy theory. It's not a conspiracy theory. The commission doesn't deny that she had private texts with the Pfizer
Yeah,
CEO. The issue is that she's not releasing it. So I don't know. Her whole speech kind of annoyed me. But anyway, then we had the group leaders responding, and it was very clear from the leaders, the center left, the SMD group, Racha Garcia, and also the liberal group of Emmanuel Macron, the Renew Europe, that they seem quite likely to abstain in this vote,
yeah.
which again will not result in von der Leyen having to resign because it won't be a 2/3 yes. But if she can only get like, I don't know, a third of the parliament proactively voting no against the censure motion, it looks really bad for her controlling coalition, which is
Yeah.
her center-right EPP, center-left SND, and Renew Liberals. What do you think is going to happen in this vote tomorrow?
I mean, firstly, if you're not following this ridiculous situation, you have all of my envy
Yes,
because
because
this
consider
is
yourself like,
fucking
it's so
ridiculous.
stupid. It's so stupid.
But I mean, firstly, to go back to the whole what we were just saying earlier. Yeah, the commission, von der Leyen is the point person on the on trade, but the problem is that everybody knows that she has to talk to the member states to get most things through, right? Like most things has to be offered by the council, which is a big part of the issue in general because von der Leyen's leadership is weakened, especially on this thing, this ridiculous shit show of a vote. I mean, god damn it. It's not going to take down her presidency. It's not going to happen. What's going to happen is that they're going to get maybe 100 people voting for it, maybe 100 people out of, I think, the 450 they need or something. So that's not going to happen. This is why I'm quite happy that the EU is becoming so politicized right now. Technically, an argument could be made that if no one is willing to vote to back up von der Leyen, because you've got people in the EPP who don't want to vote for her, who want to abstain, you've got Renew Europe, so Valérie Hayer, the leader of my party Renaissance in the European Parliament, made a scorching speech telling von der Leyen to stop playing with the far right and start taking her, her duties to the coalition seriously and to actually defend their agreements. You had, as you said, the SND who harpooned her, and they're currently harpooning her on regional funding, for example, and social funding in general. If nobody votes to support von der Leyen and it's basically everybody abstains, technically you could make the argument, if we were a bit more politically developed as a union, that she doesn't have the support to continue as the Commission president, which I think would potentially be the funniest way, as crazy it would be, to end von der Leyen too. Now, how you get beyond that point, I don't know. We've never been there before, and to be honest, we've been there once, but not in the current frameworks. Right. But the problem that we have now is that von der Leyen is currently not owning her behavior, so she's not acting as a leader. She doesn't really have the support of anybody because she keeps breaking her agreements. He just tried to basically bribe the SND by ensuring that all of the funding, certain funding would continue to go to the regions because the SND demanded this as part of the agreement. But the SND is still not convinced and is complaining about misclarity and commitment from von der Leyen. The issue is von der Leyen isn't owning her shit. And this is the most annoying thing when you have leader. Like, for example, speak about Merz. Scholz, for example, would own up when he screwed up. You had the Romanian leader that always own up when they screw up. Meloni owns up. Macron will actively pick fights with people in the streets and start arguing with people about why he's right. Keir Starmer recently told someone that they were wrong live on television and that they should probably do some fact checking. And what does von der Leyen do? Oh, it's a conspiracy theory. Oh, it's the Russians. Whereas no, and everybody who wants to see the European Union develop into the power we know it can be wants von der Leyen to just go, okay, I screwed up. Here are the text. Or even, to be honest, just own up and say, you know what, I'm not going to give it to you because I did what was in the best of the EU, and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, right? But she didn't even address it. She didn't even address it. Like the merits of releasing the text or not releasing the text, she didn't say anything about it.
And it's offensive. Like,
yeah, it is offensive.
as a federalist, as someone who is putting like my whole career at this stage is basically let's make the EU happen and make it strong, right? I don't understand why this leader that we have is so poor.
Yeah.
And the EU deserves better. European citizens deserve so much more than someone who is just a lame duck. And at this stage, we need to start figuring out what we should. You know what? Actually, screw it. We're going to be talking about treaty change in a couple of years anyway. Why don't we start already discussing what mechanisms we could have to avoid leadership like this persisting and dragging us all down while the world is on fire and Russia is trying to, plan to carpet bomb us into the Stone
Yeah.
Age, right?
I mean, I think
You
it's
know?
worth taking the argument to the people that we should have a
Yeah,
directly elected European Commission president. And I know all the dangers with that, but I think it's time to at least have a discussion about it. The thing that really annoyed me and a lot of other people with von der Leyen, with what she was saying on Monday night is, I mean, it's precisely the issue that the SND and the Liberals are angry with her about, that she and her EPP group have been flirting with the far right, the very same party that Manfred Weber, the leader of the EPP, has wanted to unite with, the ECR of Giorgia Meloni. An MEP from that group brought this no confidence motion
yeah,
against her. And all of a sudden, in her speech, she's got things to say about the far right. And it's
yeah,
like, wait a minute. Like all this time, she's been holding her fire, not wanting to offend Giorgia Meloni, not wanting to go out strongly against the far right because her EPP
yeah,
is courting them. And then all of a sudden, when it's her job on the line, now it's a far right conspiracy and they're being funded by the Russians.
yeah,
And I mean, it was the strongest she'd ever come out against the far right in order to save her own ass. It was really annoying. And I could
yeah,
tell that the leaders, especially Garcia, that they made responses that were stronger than they would have been if she hadn't had such an offensive speech to start with. I mean, you could tell it really pissed people off.
I mean, if you care about this political development of the European Union, there is no way in hell that that speech did not piss you off.
Yeah.
I mean, hell, I was pissed. Like, I mean, I'm not even the one being lied to my face and being undermined and betrayed day in day out by eternal Spitzenkandidat and never to be Commission President Manfred Weber, right? I mean, it's just offensive at this stage. And Manfred Weber is probably pulling some stupid strings in the background, trying to encourage a few people to maybe go the fact and help them out to put some pressure on von der Leyen so she does more for us and helps my agenda out more and all this kind of thing, right? Because Weber's known, despite his inability to actually achieve his one career goal in his life, he's still a decent political operator. And as one of the only people who behaves like a politician in Brussels, Manfred Weber is standing to gain some things from the situation. But
But because it's a secret vote, we won't know if the people who voted against her or abstained were
is there a
EPP or
secret vote?
SND. So yeah,
I think it's public, actually.
Is it?
I think
I've
so.
been saying it was a secret vote all this time.
I mean, let me Google that for you very
Okay.
quickly.
Well, we'll check and I'll put it in the notes of the video after.
Yeah.
If it's not secret, that's interesting. I was pretty sure it was secret. But I mean, what all of this is doing, as you say, is destabilizing her controlling coalition in the parliament. But I wrote about this last week in a Substack about the SND's frustrations, and said maybe it's time they admit they are an opposition party. I mean, this whole thing about a centrist controlling coalition in the parliament doesn't really make sense in the context of the European Union because it's not a parliamentary democracy, and really the only coalition you need as the Commission president is the coalition that puts you in office,
Yeah.
that confirms you. Then after that, there's this idea of a controlling coalition. They've always liked to do it in the parliament between the center right and the center left. But it probably makes more sense for the center left to just say, we are an opposition group. They are control hardly any countries now. Spain, Denmark, and Slovenia, I think. I think that's it. They are a minority in the commission in terms of people's political backgrounds, in the council, everywhere, in the
Yeah.
parliament. They are, the second biggest group, but they lost so many seats in the last election. Just call yourselves an opposition party, right?
And it would actually do more for the European political scene than anything, really. Like, just because. So we have this historic obsession with the Gros Coalition. So, initially it was EPP and S&D with a bit of backing from the ALDE group at the time. And then when the Renew Europe group became more powerful with after Macron's election in 2017, then it became a freeway party. There's nothing wrong with just going into opposition against the EPP. Like, the EPP
Mm.
clearly isn't the EPP we remember from 10 years ago under Juncker, right? This
I mean,
is,
what annoys me too is that the European Union has been under EPP control as long as I have lived here. For the entirety of my reporting experience, the EPP, we have a center-right government, essentially, in the European Union, but no one will say it. You have the
yeah,
center-left for all this time pretending that they're in some kind of grand coalition with the EPP. It's stupid because the EPP has had the majority in all of these institutions. They've had the commission presidency all of this time. Clearly, what's wild to me is actually, and I had a Substack about this a while ago, that we had the crisis, we had austerity, the financial crisis, we had austerity in response to it. People were mad at the conservatives, and yet they're still in. They never went out of power at EU level. They
yeah,
have always been there. They're still in power because people don't even realize they're in power. I mean, if you
yeah,
walked up to one of these people down at the beach behind me and said, "Who's controlling the European Union?" Surely not a single person on that beach would know. But I would bet even if you went up to somebody in Brussels and said, like, which political group is right now in power in the European Union, they'd be like, "Oh, I don't know," because people don't think of it that way.
yeah, of
Even it's
course.
never presented in this way, but it's just so obvious that that's what it's been.
I
But
mean, to be
it's
fair,
this problem, like you said, with the development of politicization of the EU and having kind of real EU politics that a lot of people also in the SND are reluctant to actually acknowledge
yeah.
or incite.
I mean, to be fair, if you walk up to a random person in Brussels, you've got a certain percentage chance that someone's going to tell you the Illuminati is in charge of the EU, right? So, I mean,
That's
to be honest, ah,
probably
also, I
over
just,
there as well as in the beach.
yeah, exactly. Also, I just checked and the vote is indeed public, so it's going to be quite interesting to see how people actually
Okay.
vote and who votes against it, to be honest. But
Okay.
no, it's true that because of the fact that the EU is still developing, and to be honest, I would be surprised if in my lifetime we saw people being active like, I'm into EU politics, I'm against the EPP on a moral background, I support the Greens or some nonsense. Like, we'll get there eventually. I'm not sure how quickly in my lifetime it will take primacy over all other European political scenes, blah, blah. But it's true, it's not developed the way it has. And I think we're starting to run out of steam in that direction of political development, purely because of the fact that people are waking up and picking up on things. I mean, I've had my parents my parents have been around since de Gaulle was, right? And they remember the old days of politics in France and everything. And they regularly ask me, what's going on in European politics? They followed the coverage on TV5 Monde and all these other channels and blah, blah, blah. So we're seeing that there is a development in European political consciousness that is actually bringing us to a point that people are asking more questions like, why is von der Leyen allowed to do this? Why is the EPP constantly in power? Why shouldn't I follow Dave Keating and Julien on Substack? Why is Manfred Weber never going to be commission president? Like, all of these questions are starting to be raised, and people are talking about this more and more on social media as well.
I mean, for sure,
Cafes.
President von der Leyen is the most well-known commission president in the history of the European Union, more than Delors. If I went on the street and asked, on the beach behind me and asked people, who is Ursula von der Leyen or who is the president of the
Yeah.
commission? I think the majority of people, maybe 60% or something, would know who Ursula von der Leyen is. And that's a really new. I mean, people did not know who Jean-Claude Juncker was or who Barroso was, for sure.
Which is a damn shame, because Juncker is potentially the funniest commission president we've ever had. I mean, I still fondly remember him slapping Victor
in which they
Orban.
knew him.
Yeah, of course.
They only knew his drunken antics, not his
the
political
poor
policy.
I mean, his fight with the far right was always funny. But yeah, I mean, we're getting there. And this kind of situation helps a lot because people, I mean, I've already had someone I know ask me, oh no, they're going to bring down the commission. It's like, no, they're not going to bring down the commission. But it's nice that you're asking this question, right? Or
I had a couple people text me outside of Brussels, one from Berlin, another in Italy, being like, what's going on? Is because they hate von der Leyen, both of these people. A lot of people I know. I mean, usually the people who know who von der Leyen is, it's not because they like it.
This is true.
and
This
it's
is true.
often to do with Israel, to be honest. Um, so,
Of
and
course.
both of
Yeah.
these people dislike her for that reason. And so they texted me and said, is she going to be thrown out? I said, no. Okay, but they don't normally follow EU politics for sure,
Yeah.
but this was on their list.
Yeah. And it's nice to see this, even if it's just people hating for the sake of hating, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, this is all part of the whole education thing that we need to keep going and that everybody needs to get involved in, right? Is that we need to keep educating people about why these events matter, how these things function, where we're going with them, what is possible, what will happen, etc., etc. Because this is the kind of thing that is slowly building into, pardon me, a wider European consciousness is actually building this thing. Like, for example, I had people coming up to me and saying, "Oh, hey, I heard that Bulgaria is joining the Eurozone." Like, when the hell in your life did someone come up to you excited about a random member state joining the Eurozone, right? It's
Uh,
cool. It's super
Now
cool.
they can go skiing in Bulgaria and spend the same
Exactly.
credits.
And they don't have to buy 2011 or whatever it is, the exchange rate
I don't even
for.
remember what the coincidence. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we should wrap up soon, but before we go, let's talk about what's unfolding as we speak, which is this police raid on the Front National, or the National Rally in France. You're well positioned to talk about this. So,
Oh, yeah.
what's going on with that? And I actually, to be honest, I haven't been following this specifically today. Is it to do with the existing investigation against Marine Le Pen for the use of funds?
No, this is the second investigation that's apparently just on that. So I wrote about this on Sunday in the French Dispatch. If you're not subscribed, how dare you? I'm so offended. But what happened is that there were improprieties raised in the ways in which the Identity and Democracy group, that has now split into two other groups, was using the funding given to the group, I believe. And what has happened is that right now, they're investigating the usage of this money and how it was given to potentially some charities, sent to certain service providers that were already part of the previous Le Pen investigation for improper use of funding, blah, blah, blah. And what is now happening is that apparently this investigation has been escalated. And the financial prosecutors and several judges raided the Rassemblement National headquarters in Paris this morning, which of course led to Jordan Bardella, Le Pen's successor and potential presidential candidate in 27, to complain about how he was being victimized, how this was just the EU trying to keep the man down, and blah, blah, blah. Forgetting that every single political party in France has been raided in some way, shape, or form based on several, investigations. Not all of them go anywhere, but the problem for Bardella and the reason why he's playing victim is that this seems to have teeth, and the only defense that they seem to actually have against any accusations, as far as we can see them now, is that basically the anti-fraud office and the corruption offices and the financial prosecutors at the European level are trying to figure out if you can hold the successor parties to the ID group, or the successor groups, which is the Patriots for Europe, who aren't necessarily that patriotic or pro-European, the European or sovereign nations, who aren't necessarily very European, don't really like sovereignty, and probably don't like nations either, who split off after the last elections and changed their names and their statutes and everything, but mostly have all of the same people as before. Now, I think there's a very good chance that there's going to be a legal argument made that they can all be held responsible for what their group did previously. And this will have very big repercussions for people like Viktor Orban, for the Hungarian Fidesz, for the Polish far right, and most importantly, at least in France, for Jordan Bardella, who is currently being coyly positioned as the successor to Le Pen, since she's still appealing her 5-year ban from political office that basically kills her career and is likely to persist. And if he then goes down as part of another investigation because he only briefly and very narrowly avoided prosecution in the last investigation based on a technicality, whatever. If he then goes down under this, then the French far right is not in great shape. I mean, what's going to happen? You're going to have Marion Maréchal Le Pen, who's not particularly very well liked. and who's known for betraying her partners. You got Eric Zemmour, who, the minute his party did fairly well in the last European elections, he lost 4 MEPs within a week, who all left and created their own party with Marion Maréchal or whatever. And on top of that, a lot of the people who aren't as extreme as the others would potentially then go for the slightly less far right, but still very far right, Pour la République or whatever Eric Ciotti's party is called, who is mostly well known for barricading himself into the Les Républicains headquarters, banning everybody from going inside, and basically impersonating Michael Jackson outside of the window. I mean, it's not a great look, right? And if you have even
It's a
more
circus over
corruption,
there these days.
it's a fucking circus, man. And then the worst part is that despite all of this, you've got a substantive portion of the French electorate who are like, you know what? I like the cut of their jib. And it's absolute bollocks. And it's like the worst part is that people aren't even at this stage voting necessarily for them because they support what they're trying to do. They're just mad at everybody else. They're picking the people who are the most violent towards the people they don't like. And
I will say though, with the investigation against Le Pen, I get asked about this a lot by Americans. Obviously, the Trump administration is supporting her and pointing to this as an example of political persecution. And there was this article that that the U.S. government offered to pay her legal fees, which she declined, which was super interesting. But I think it's important because people say, well, what, this is just a Trump charge. She moved money around. Who cares? Who cares what, like, they were given this money? Who cares what they spend it on? I don't think they fully understand it. This is EU taxpayer money going to political groups for them to use for EU purposes, for the European Parliament. That is a very unique funding mechanism that European political groups get taxpayer money. And you can say that's good or that's bad, but I'll tell you, it's necessary at the EU level. Nationally, political parties are generally not funded by the taxpayer. So when you take that money that's been paid by a Swedish person, let's say, you are stealing that Swedish person's money to use it to benefit a French national party against all of the rules, against all of the expectations of that Swedish taxpayer. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about essentially stealing money from all taxpayers, including French taxpayers, but it's particularly egregious when it's a not French taxpayer, and putting it toward a domestic party in France. That's what we're talking about here. I think that when this story is covered by the media, they really gloss over what this is. They don't explain it, and it comes off, I think, to most viewers and readers as a trumped-up charge that they're just politically persecuting her.
Yeah, and I mean, so there's a few things that, shock horror, a Trump supporter doesn't quite understand when the law is a good thing and that you have to defend certain things, even if you like the person. But it's one of these very interesting things where in France, we're quite aggressive when it comes to prosecuting, these kind of crimes, because financial embezzlement is a big issue. And it's something that when you have a system like in France where you're actively, public funding is put towards encouraging political participation and public participation, making sure that people aren't necessarily holding back on their political activity because of the fact that they can't afford the massive cost of this kind of activity, right? When you have a system where, again, everybody's paying into a giant pot that's being used to fund political activity at the European level, and having worked on the revision of the regulation related to this, which is 1142/2014, there's very, very, very specific ways of using European funding, all of which is mostly to make sure that you can do your work as an MEP, that your assistants are well paid enough that they can just do their work without any issues, that you're able to actively encourage and sort of support the engagement in European politics.
Yeah.
These are very,
that's
very
the point. It's
specific.
the European politics.
Exactly.
Right? It's so specific to that. You're essentially taking money from the EU budget and illegally transferring it to national activities.
And it's specifically highlighted that you can't go and use this money for domestic political activity. And this is exactly what Marine Le Pen's group did. And this is what is potentially going to come out in the second investigation. Marine Le Pen took money that was intended to make sure that, whether they're Eurosceptic or not, in this case, I don't really give a shit, to be honest, to make sure that Marine Le Pen's electors felt represented at the European level, that the work that they wanted to see completed at the European level, if there's any in the first place, whatever, was being done, and that they were able to actually do their jobs as MEPs. And what happened instead is that they basically took all of that money and started creating fake jobs, and people were not doing their jobs. People were working in local municipalities, they were working in the headquarters, they were creating graphics for presidential elections, municipal elections, consular elections, whatever. And this, surprise, surprise, is illegal.
Yeah.
This is embezzlement. You cannot steal money, especially to the tune of, what was it in the end? I think I saw numbers between 3.4 and like 7 million at some stage or
Yeah,
whatever.
it's a lot. I think that's also the people in the US have this impression that it was a small amount of money, but it was actually really big.
No, it was millions.
Um, I'd say so. We have to wrap it up because my phone's about to die, actually, and I don't want to
Man, charge your
suddenly
phone.
disappear. Then, yeah, I should have. But anyway, great talking to you. Uh,
Always.
Enjoy the rest of your summer. I hope you also end up at a beach at some point.
At
Everyone
some
deserves
point.
to be at a beach.
I mean, at this stage, I'm doing mostly city breaks, but I'll find a way to make my way to a beach at some point, even if it's just in Belgium or something. Like,
Good.
yeah.
Well, we'll see what happens with this new trade deadline. But in the meantime, let's all try to enjoy ourselves as much as possible.
Yeah, and again, if you're not paying attention to this von der Leyen vote nonsense, you have all of
Just
my envy.
skip it.
Just skip it. Just don't
Yeah.
subscribe to our Substacks and keep watching our stuff, but don't pay
Yeah.
attention to this vote.
To
It's
catch up
absolute
later.
nonsense. Yeah.
All right. Thanks for
Anyway,
watching, everybody.
ciao, guys.
Bye bye.